Hello and a pleasant good evening, afternoon, or morning, whatever it is when you're viewing this. But if you're tuning in with us live, thank you very much for tuning in. To my left and to my right, you will see the great sages of the lodge, none other than the YouTube channel members, longtime Twitch subscribers, or people who donate directly. But like I always say to you guys, all I ask is that you're here to hang out and have a good time. Now, with that said, we have a very exciting episode today. We're going to talk obviously primarily about Final Fantasy and which one of the entries in the anthology is due for a remake next. Obviously, this is a largely contested idea. I do want to give every Final Fantasy its due, and there has been a lot of chatter about it lately. Like, for instance, we'll go over it when we get there, but, you know, a lot of the producers have been chirping about, you know, their different ideas about what different sort of remakes would entail. So this has become a much more popular conversation flying around Square Enix lately. And, you know, obviously we're going to address the Final Fantasy IX sized elephant in the room. If anything, that's probably where we're going to start. But for those of you who are in the chat already, and let me pull it up, see who we got here. We got Zane98, Kevin Ribeiro, Rock Spaceship, and Ryanitis, and Noct Flugel, who just jumped in here. FF6 all the way says Rock. I think that's a very popular stance. Hope everyone's doing well. Been a while since I've been on stream. Been a while since we saw you, Zane, but happy you popped back in here. Kevin Ribeiro, good to see you as always. And yeah, Zane, everything's good on my end. Hope things are good on your end. Getting a lot of good stuff done behind the scenes. FF17 should be remade next. But in all seriousness, FF8, I mean, look, we're going to talk about it. You can see little love for 7 and 8. Little love for 7 and 8 in the back today. But we're definitely going to get into absolutely all of that. Let me see. Where should we start? Let me see. Again, I think it would probably be appropriate if we address the Final Fantasy IX sized elephant in the room. Just let me make sure I have that ready to go. Yes, I do. Let's pull this up for the good people on Twitch and YouTube. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Final Fantasy IX, because this is probably the title everyone has their eyes on. So for people who may not be in the know or may not be up to speed, there was a leak that came out years and years and years ago. Now, typically, I don't like to talk about leaks, but the genie's out of the bottle in the sense that pretty much everything from this leak has come true. It was an NVIDIA leak where a bunch of publishers and developers like Square Enix, their upcoming titles were leaked, and pretty much everything that came from that leak ended up being true. But the only title yet to be announced, unless I'm missing one, the only title yet to be announced that was included actually is Final Fantasy IX. So a lot of people have kind of been waiting like, hey, where's this FF9 announcement? Like, for instance, guys, Kingdom Hearts 4 was listed on that NVIDIA leak before we ever saw that trailer. Like, it was accurate down to a T, and not just with Square Enix, but many other publishers and developers as well. So this isn't so much of a rabbit being pulled out of a hat. This ended up being kind of the real deal. Now, I think we can expect to see some sort of Final Fantasy IX project, right? There was an interview years ago where the director, or I think it was the producer, said that they would prefer to work on a sequel to Final Fantasy IX rather than a Final Fantasy IX remake. So for all we know, that could be what the leak was about. The truth is, there's just been so much thrown around about FF9. I mean, there was supposedly an anime or cartoon that was being worked on. There was supposed to be a remaster before this remake. So, again, there's just been so much chatter about FF9, and it's very clear that Square Enix is cooking something, but a lot of people are coming away saying different things. Some people are saying cartoon anime. Some people are saying a remaster. Some people are saying a full-blown remake. Your guess is as good as mine. What I will say is we can 100% expect to probably hear something about Final Fantasy IX soon. Now, when I talk about all these titles today and what deserves a remake, let me make something clear. Being the best game doesn't mean you deserve a remake. Like, for instance, I think there's a big reason Final Fantasy VII became, at the very least, the first one to be fully remade, right? And we'll get back to FF9 in a minute. But I think the reason why FF7 was chosen was not just because of its popularity, but guys, like aesthetically speaking, it's like the worst looking Final Fantasy game. The pixel art has aged better than a lot of those polygons, especially the non-cutscene polygons that you see, you know, the in-game ones. So FF7 was this game that everyone knew was not only like a gameplay masterpiece, but as far as video game storytelling went, at the time it was an absolute storytelling masterpiece. So everyone knew that not that it deserved better, but that it deserved a new perspective. It deserved a new light somewhere down the road. That's why even as early as the PS3, they were doing Final Fantasy VII Remake tech demos. So I think the reason why FF7 was kind of like in this Goldilocks zone was because not only was it the most popular Final Fantasy, but it was one that needed a new coat of paint the most, right? So I'm trying to figure out between all these other Final Fantasies being thrown around, which one falls into that category or falls into that Goldilocks zone the most, right? It has enough popularity that it could sell a second time around, but it also needs enough of an update that it would get people excited to see it in a new light. So, again, let's get back to the Final Fantasy IX of it all. Vitrin, David, good to see you. Thanks for making it. Thanks for making it. I gotta mute myself when I'm taking a sip, man. I know that microphone's picking up the gulps. Anyway, let's get back into it here. So, with FF9, I think this one is probably going to end up with some sort of remake. Now, we're going to get into some comments Yoshi P made about it. He talked about FF9 and what the scale of a remake might look like. But I think FF9 is a good one. And I'm not going to really, when we talk about what deserves a remake the most out of the remaining ones, I am going to put FF9 to the side just because we seem to have a soft confirmation that it already exists. But before we started getting into some of the other ones like FF8, FF6, I did want to touch on Final Fantasy IX and say that I think this is a game that deserves a remake for one big reason. 1 year after this game came out, FF10 dropped. Like, this game did not have a lot of time to breathe. I really think it's one of the best games Squaresoft has ever made. Like, Final Fantasy IX, for me, if it's not a top 5 Final Fantasy, it's top 6. It's a brilliant game that I think more people ought to play. So in that sense, I think that's why it's being remade, because it's a game a lot of people missed out on. Just because back then they were pumping out Final Fantasies every year, 2 years. You were getting a new mainline title. So because of that, not many people got around to FF9. And I found that people who are fans of Final Fantasy, I seldom find someone who doesn't absolutely fall in love with Final Fantasy IX. So I think 9, like 7, does fall into that Goldilocks zone. Enough time has passed that a fresh coat of paint could look really good. And that even though it's niche, it's popular enough that it may draw some eyes to it. Also in the sense that not many people got to it the first time around. Now, give me 1 second. I have an article here with Yoshi P talking about it. Let me see if I can find exactly the spot I'm looking for. Okay. Let me see. Is that all of them? Almost. Okay, cool. All right. Let's hop into this. Here we go, gang. All right. So here's an interview coming to us from SI.com. Talking with Yoshi P. For those who don't know, Yoshi P is one of the heads of Creative Studio 3. That's one of the studios at Square Enix that make the mainline Final Fantasy games. So for those who follow my channel, you're probably mostly familiar with Creative Studio 1, the ones in charge of, say, the FF7 trilogy and Kingdom Hearts. So those are your Nomura's, your Nojima's, your Katase's. Creative Studio 3 is another studio within Square Enix. They work on Final Fantasy 12, 14, 16, and so on. So they asked Yoshi P about Final Fantasy IX. If you could remake any classic Final Fantasy game, what would you make? Now this is interesting. Check it out. It says, oh man, that's a tough question. The one that I would like to make myself would be Final Fantasy III. Now I got a clip I want to pull aside. We're going to talk about Final Fantasy III today. It says, I think, of course, I do know where there are requests for Final Fantasy IX to be made, right? He didn't have to bring up FF9, but he did. Right? You know, he mentioned FF3, that's what he wants, and he immediately pivoted into Final Fantasy IX. I do know there are a lot of requests for Final Fantasy IX to be made, but when you think about Final Fantasy IX, it's a game with huge volume. When you think about all that volume, I wonder if it's possible to remake that as a single title. It's a difficult one. It is a tough question. So I kind of wanted to touch on that, because this is going to be a big theme when we talk about some of the other titles today. Let me just say, I'm not a big fan of this reasoning. Like, how do I put this? Here's the last thing I'll say. about FF remakes in general and FF9 before we move on to some of the other ones. Just to kind of establish again where I'm coming from, what my perspective is, why I'm going to feel the way I feel when I explain. This idea that these games have so much volume, they need to be made into multiple entries, I don't buy it. Now, somebody in the chat wants to disagree with me, put me in my place. This is your invitation to do so. But I just don't buy it. Now, please do not get me wrong. I absolutely love and adore the FF7 trilogy. Remake and Rebirth are some of the best Final Fantasy games to come out in the last decade. So don't get that twisted. I absolutely love it. And there's a lot of reasons FF7 got the trilogy. One of it is that it has enough popularity that it could sell a game 3 times over. Now, FF3 was already remade. It was more a remaster on the DS. Is that what you're thinking about? Because that's what came to mind for me. But to keep myself on track here, this idea that now when we remake any Final Fantasy, it has to be a trilogy, I just don't buy it, guys. I just don't buy it, and I don't think it's true. I understand there's the desire to expand upon everything that was in the original in a way that the FF7 trilogy is getting to do. But also keep in mind that the FF7 trilogy had a whole compilation of context that also has to be included. We've seen the Crisis Core. We've seen the Dirge of Cerberus, right? We've even seen some before Crisis. A lot of it, First Soldier, a lot of it is bleeding in. So there's a lot going on there. At games like FF9, it's one game. Now, again, maybe you don't get to expand and explore as much of everything as you may want, but don't tell me you can't make an 80-hour RPG that includes all of FF9 and that venture. I just don't buy it. I get that it's probably fun, the idea of making a trilogy, you can expand on everything, but these remakes don't need to be 3 titles. I don't think every time one of my favorite games from when I was younger gets announced for a remake, I gotta wait 10 years for the whole story to tell itself. No, at this point, I'd rather you just put 80 hours into one adventure, remake as much of it with the big volume as you can, and sell it to me in one go. And who knows, and then if the game sells well, you could do some DLC that expands upon other areas, or other, like, you could do an episode Garnet, you could do an episode Vivi, right? But I'm not sold on this idea that these games were so big back then that you need 3 games to do it now. You needed 1 game to do it back then. You could do it with 1 game now. Just, maybe you don't have to go so explosive on the graphics that the game is 160 gigs, Metaphor ReFantazio, I think that game is 40 gigs. Anyway, I'm getting a little too out of hand now. Okay, now with all of that established, primarily that we're looking for a Final Fantasy that falls into the Goldilocks zone of this is old enough that it needs a fresh coat of paint, but it's also popular enough to generate enough excitement when a remake is announced. So let me just double check some of my articles here before we move forward. For instance, actually, while I'm on it, this is also something I wanted to share. I brought this up earlier. A Final Fantasy VI remake would take twice as long as FF7. It's like, again, I'm understanding the sentiment, but not every remake should be done in the style of FF7. I understand what he's saying. The world of FF6 is more vast and expansive than the world of FF7, just as a solo entry, 6 to 7. But again, man, we don't have to do everything at a remake scale. We can scale it down, man. The whole industry needs to scale itself down. These Final Fantasy remakes are no different. Again, I love the trilogy. I think it's amazing. I'm having a blast with it. But in the future, I don't want to wait 10 years for a story to retell itself. Again, make it a big, long game. Charge me $80 if you need to. I don't care. Just give it to me in one go. All right. Now, let's talk a little. A game that I think does not get nearly as much love as it deserves, and that's going to be Final Fantasy VIII, the ugly stepsister of the PlayStation 1 era. And I say that endearingly. I do love this game. It's been a while since I've played it. I definitely have my gripes with it. I think it's the weakest of the PlayStation 1 era, but I also think the PlayStation 1 era is arguably the golden era of Final Fantasy. Especially if you were to include 6 from the Super Nintendo and 10 from the PS2. I've said this forever. From 6 to 10, I truly believe is the golden era of Final Fantasy. And 8 just happens to be one of the weaker among that lot but it's still such a brilliant game that I wish more people had the chance to experience. Hence, why I think it can do well with a remake. Now, let me mute myself so you don't hear these gulps. Adonai chimes in with, I'm pretty against remakes and nostalgia bait in general. I do appreciate remakes, but meh. Well, I'll say this, man. I'm more excited for the theoretical Final Fantasy XVII than I would be about any remakes of these older games, right? So, for instance, I'm about to gush about FF8 a little bit. My experiences playing Final Fantasy VIII were so incredible. The game was so amazing to me just as it was that there really is no need inside of me to really deeply desire a remake from this game. Just because, again, I had such a good time with the original, which I think is great in so many ways, that it'll be hard to remake this game in a way that captures the experience I had when I was younger. FF7 is certainly making a bid for it. They have a chance to pull it off, but they really got to stick that landing, man. They've really, really, really got to stick that landing. But let's talk about Final Fantasy VIII. So, I've always said, I feel like, just again, I'm going to gush about it a little bit. I feel like the fashion designs in FF8 are so good. Like, in particular, Nomura always kills it with the fashion and the outfits, but there's something in particular about FF8 that I absolutely love. I don't know why. It stands out among the other titles surrounding it, 7 and 9. Like, if you're talking about 7, 8, and 9, who's got the coolest outfits, it's got to be FF8. Now, I can respect that FF8 attempted to do something that could have revolutionized the genre. So, there was is 8 that good, says Ryanadis? I've started it so many times, then just lose interest, play other games here. Here's the thing, FF8 takes some time to get started. You really, if you can make it to like the third point or the midpoint, you'll get hooked. I promise you. I promise you. And honestly, if you're a Kingdom Hearts fan, FF8 is the most Kingdom Hearts-ish Final Fantasy from that era. So, again, there's just something about FF8 and its visual aesthetic that I absolutely love. I also think Ultimecia is such a cool villain, both in concept and design. So again, this is a game that sort of like FF9, because 8 and 9 were sandwiched between 7 and 10, which have become like the pillars of Final Fantasy, particularly that era. 8 is another one where I'm like, man, I wish more people had the chance to play it. Making a remake of this will be tough, in my opinion, because I don't think it has the popularity that 7 has to carry a remake, or that maybe even 9 has to carry a remake. But certainly I would love to see it because it would give more people a chance to experience this story, which does get a little wacky here and there. Right. As wacky as you could imagine Squaresoft getting. Wackier than Kingdom Hearts wacky. I'll go there. FF8's wacky is wackier than Kingdom Hearts wacky, okay? Anyway, especially when you consider Ultimecia's goal. I'm not going to spoil anything. I almost spoiled. Zip it. We got people here who haven't played it. Got myself in check now. Anyway, I can respect, going to what I was saying earlier, that FF8 attempted to do something that could have revolutionized all of RPGs. Now, one of the big complaints about RPGs back in the day was that there was too much grinding, right? The final bosses and the boss ladders at the end were so powerful that it almost always required the player to like sort of laterally break off from the adventure and just go grind in the wild until they were strong enough to overcome the final bosses. Now, for me, if I love a combat enough, this isn't a problem for me. For instance, FF10. I'm in love with FF10's combat. So when I got humbled by the final boss in 10, it really wasn't an issue for me to go run around and fight some things, right? Because the combat was so enjoyable that, again, it really wasn't a big deal to get out there and just get after it. But I can respect that FF8 made an attempt to solve that problem, and that's what the draw system was. Now, without confusing the hell out of everybody and explaining exactly what the draw system is, I'd rather just tell you what it was intended to do. And it seems to me what the draw system was intended to do was to balance every single fight you're in to the point that grinding was unnecessary. Here's the problem. People like me like the grinding. So I think FF8 would be faced with a bit of an identity crisis if it got remade, because the question would have to become again, if we remake this gameplay-wise. Because here's the thing, story-wise, I know they can remake this and make it beautiful, rip everyone's hearts out, and make us cry all over again, like this game does. The question comes down to gameplay remake. Do you try to recapture a sort of draw system attempt? Something to make grinding obsolete, or do you play it safe? And what version of playing safe do you have? Do you do action combat? Do you do turn-based? Again, even though I think this is a game that would do really well with the remake, especially aesthetically, I think you run into a problem with gameplay. I really do, because I think its gameplay identity always sort of struggled. So there's not a whole lot to sort of draw from there. Whereas FF7 had its ATB system, which even though we've switched to a more action-oriented system, that ATB system is still embedded in the identity of the gameplay. Love Ultimecia, literally my second favorite character next to Sephiroth. Much love. Oh yeah, she's great. She's great. Do you think Part 3's budget will be cut? Oh, for FF7. No, I don't. Because I think they envision that the FF7 remake trilogy is going to keep selling after it's done. Because a lot of casual gamers, and this is why I don't think they should ever do this trilogy again. Again, even though I love the trilogy, I don't think they should ever do it again. Because I do know people who are like, I'm just going to wait for the third one to come out before I get into that. You know? And I can respect people who want to approach it that way. Noctlugal says, there's an interview where Kitase said that he would adjust the battle system if they remade FF8. Okay. But this, see what I mean? It almost seems like they're having these conversations, right? It almost seems like they're having these conversations over at Square Enix. But they would have to adjust the battle system because, again, it lacks an identity. I don't think they would try and do the draw system again. I think they'd try to do something new, try to do something... Maybe they would do turn-based to try and differentiate itself from the FF7 remake. Maybe they would do turn-based. But anyway, for now, that's all I want to speak on for FF8. We talked about the FF9 size elephant in the room, but now I want to talk about one that, you know, I haven't... Sometimes when I get into this, when I do these episodes that kind of ask a sort of open question, sometimes I'll go into it with like an answer that I'm willing to have my mind change depending on what I, you know, think over. Because again, a lot of these episodes where I do this kind of stuff, you guys notice, I'm really just thinking out loud, taking it as it is, bouncing off your guys' ideas and chats. But I kind of went into this one thinking this is the one that deserves a remake. This is the one that would do the best. Let me let it roll. We're talking about Final Fantasy VI. Ben Starr did say FF8 is his favorite. And Ben Starr, for those who don't know, is Clive's voice actor in FF16. I imagine there'll be a collector's edition with all 3 remake games. There 100% will be. They envision that trilogy is going to continue to sell even after its initial release and hype cycles. They absolutely are having these meetings, 100%. Now look, for me, if we're talking about which games should be remade next, I really think FF6 is a candidate. A strong one. A strong one. This is a game that is universally loved. You don't have many games like that anymore, right? Even FF8, games like FF8 have detract. I mean, every game has its detractors, right? But FF6 is really one of those games you never hear anyone complain about. And there's a good reason for that. It's still a great game. It still looks really good. This is the one where if I ended this episode right now, Final Fantasy VI is the one I think would do the best as a remake. I really do. I think it has enough popularity and enough intrigue that people would give it a shot. And I also think that even today, it has, let's put it this way, it has such a strong gameplay foundation that building a modern turn-based combat system based on what's in FF6, oh my God. Oh my God, you could have some fun with that. Because this sort of like, for those who are maybe more familiar with OG FF7, FF6 was one of the first games, I believe FF5 and games before it did it, but FF6 is one of the games to further expand upon not only selecting the move, but that certain moves, you'll press certain button combinations or you'll have to react in certain ways to sort of enhance the move, which I think is turn-based combat at its best. My God, the opera scene is amazing. The opera scene is amazing. If 6 is remade, they have to make it into 2 games. Let me tell you, dude, we were discussing that earlier. I don't buy into that. Don't make it 2 games. Just make it a long game. Atlas is a studio. Atlas as a studio is a fraction of the size of Square Enix. And they just made Metaphor ReFantazio, a brand new IP, so no legacy to stand on. Brand new IP, 100-hour game. If they can make a 100-hour game, you can make a 100-hour game. So I understand how big FF6 is, that you can't wrap this thing up in 30, 40 hours. But to me, it's like, okay, better make it a 90 to 100-hour RPD. Would you want 2D HD? Knock Flugel, you read my mind. I was going to do I have a whole separate portion about 2D HD for the back end of the podcast. So Knock Flugel, hold on to that. We are going to get into 2D HD because it's going to play into a lot of what I'm talking about here when we're talking about scale and fitting things in. So let's keep it going. I just started playing Persona 4, my first Atlas game. So amazing. So amazing. And that's my point, is like, I just think ultimately, and this has kind of been my position for the whole episode, if Square Enix continues to do remakes, scale it down. I know I just said make an 80-hour RPG, but compared to the FF7 trilogy, an 80-hour RPG would be scaling down. So that's saying something. Scale it down. Fit it into one game. I think your marketing team will thank you for it. You know? Because again, there are people who are holding out on FF7 because they want to play the whole thing in one shebang. Or they at least want to have the whole thing accessible to them at once. You know? Because there are people who like, you know, for instance, imagine somebody played Remake and they're like, you know what, I'm going to skip Rebirth because by the time the 3rd game's out, I'm going to forget everything that happened in Remake. So again, I totally understand that position. I don't think Square Enix should put themselves in that position again because I don't think there's another Final Fantasy that can carry the series with that kind of popularity compared to 7. So, that little mini rant done. By the way, guys, thanks for hanging out. Really appreciate you guys hanging out with me this Sunday. You could be doing anything with your time, and you're hanging out with me while we nerd out and talk some Final Fantasy. So, thank you. Chat, those of you tuning in, lurkers. Show would not be the same without you, plain and simple. Now, with that said, let's get back into it here. So, Final Fantasy VI, I think, is the game that no matter what approach you took to it, we're going to talk about HD2D later, whether it be an HD2D approach, whether it be a 3D approach. I think FF6 has all the pieces. It has the popularity, right? It has the being universally beloved. It has that. You know, you got people like Angry Video Game Nerd who will make a big fuss about FF6, right? That man believes that this is the greatest video game ever made. Okay? That carries a lot of weight in the online space. Also, shout out to James Rolfe, dude. Like, he's one of the OGs of gaming, internet gaming. Anyway, Final Fantasy VI, plain and simple, has all the pieces. The popularity, it would look great with a visual upgrade, be it HD2D or 3D, and it has a gameplay foundation that is strong enough that simply building upon it will suffice. As opposed to FF8, where I really think they would have to take it from the top. Ooh, baby. All right. Do you think here? Actually, let me make you guys a little bigger. Let me make you guys a little bigger when we're doing this. There we go. There you guys are. So if the one title for the remake is very long, will it still have to appeal among gamers outside the core fans? It would still have to, and I think it would make it easier to appeal to newcomers, right? For a newcomer, the FF7 trilogy is a big undertaking, right? As Kingdom Hearts fans, we could probably understand this, right? People may want to get into Kingdom Hearts, but they're like, man, that's a lot of games to catch up on. When you're talking about RPGs, particularly like Final Fantasy VII, this trilogy, like Remake is a 40-hour RPG, Rebirth is like a 60, 70-hour RPG. Those playtimes, they add up, man. And a lot of people aren't going to want to space that out. A lot of people aren't going to want, when it's all said and done, to give a Final Fantasy game 200 plus hours. People like me will want to do it. People like you guys in the chat will want to do it. But if you want to appeal to people from outside of the series, you can't make it too intimidating to get into. So that's why I'm a stern believer that if they keep doing these remakes, they gotta be one part. I could be wrong. But that's just what I believe. What FF should get the Rebirth treatment? I don't think any other FFs should get the FF7 treatment. Bottom line. I don't think any other Final Fantasy warrants that kind of treatment. As someone who loves this series, you can see FF10, which we will talk about right up there on my wall. Do you think if they remake Terra, will she keep her turn-based or is she getting the cage tree? Should be turn-based. They should keep her turn-based. 100% keep the game turn-based. 100%. Roll Neptune says, hope I didn't miss much. You didn't miss too much. Probably a little bit before the halfway point. It's definitely like watching anime like I'm never going to watch One Piece. That's kind of my point, right? Like One Piece is appealing to me. I look at that art. It looks great. People whose opinion I trust say One Piece is great. But the fact it's 1,000 episodes makes me go, maybe I'll watch Naruto instead, right? Even though that's a lengthy thing, it's half the length. You get my point there. You get my point there. So, let's move into this. Again, we'll have plenty of time to talk about stuff like that. Let's move into our next one here. Zane says, by the time the FF7 trilogy is done, it'll be almost 10 years since Remake. They can't repeatedly do that among FF titles. It's unsustainable. It's unsustainable. Don't get me wrong. Like, I would love the idea that all my favorite Final Fantasies got the FF7 Rebirth treatment, but it's going to put Square Enix out of business. You know what I'm saying? What's up, Luz? Yep, we got a Final Fantasy podcast today. We did 2 Kingdom Hearts ones, over the last couple weeks. Now we'll do an FF one. Lamb is here. Good to hear from you, man. It's been a while since I've caught your streams. How you doing, Lamb? I'm doing great. Happy to see you here. I hope you've been well. I really hope you've been well, man. It's nice to have you in here. All right. Here's the thing, guys. And you know what? Actually, since this is oriented the way it is, let's move this over. Let's talk about FF10. That's what I got pulled up here, man. And yeah, we can move this over. Yeah, we'll do that. I think it's FF10. Yeah, FF10. So, let's be honest. I do not think FF10 needs a remake. I don't. I don't think it needs a remake at all. But here's the thing. If any game's getting a remake, guys, other than 9, because again, 9 is like soft confirmed, but it's probably going to be 10. Just because 10 has the popularity. Gingerbread Man says, I'm a sucker for FF3 for some reason. You know what, Gingerbread Man? I'm gonna do this for you. I'm gonna put you on. I'll put you on, Gingerbread Man, because you missed it earlier. We will talk about it a little bit. But the guy who directed Final Fantasy 16 and who works on FF14, check this out. So one of the big dogs at Square Enix has said the one I would like to make myself would be Final Fantasy 3. So Gingerbread Man, there's a very powerful voice at Square Enix that feels the way you do. Our man Yoshi P, who did FF16, FF14, he's smelling what you're stepping in. Bro. I just wanted to show you that. Okay. Where was I here? Jesus. All right, pull this back up. Pull it back up. So FF10. Here's the thing. FF10 is honestly a good candidate simply because it has the popularity. Simply because Final Fantasy X has the popularity that people would do it. People would buy into it. Not only that, FF10 is canonically in the same universe as Final Fantasy VII. So, not only does it have that going for it, but Creative Studio One, who's making the FF7 remakes, they're also the same studio that worked on Final Fantasy X, which, by the way, man, I miss the PlayStation 2 faces. They look so good. But here's the thing. I love Final Fantasy X. It might be my favorite Final Fantasy ever. It's either 10 or 14 are my favorite Final Fantasy ever. It doesn't need the remake, but strictly due to its popularity and strictly due to how much the studio loves this game in particular, it's got a pretty good chance. And then you have the studio who, here, I'll pull up the receipts. I will pull up the receipts. And move this over. 1 second, guys. Let's move that over. Square Enix says Final Fantasy, this came out years ago, this article, a Coming to us from My Nintendo News, Square Enix says Final Fantasy X-3 story synopsis exists, and there's a possibility game could be made in the future. This is kind of what I'm getting at, where I'm like, the building blocks are more present for an FF10 remake than anything else not named Final Fantasy IX. They want to make FF10 3. And I imagine that if they do it, I could see them doing some kind of remake or remaster of 10 and 10-2 to generate that excitement all over again. It would almost be like a cheat code so that they could do a trilogy again. Because they could just do a remake of 10 and 10-2, and then the third game would be a brand new thing. But again, I almost knocked my microphone out. 10-2, it's also perfect. Listen, I love Final Fantasy X-2. I absolutely love Final Fantasy X-2. It is nowhere near as good as Final Fantasy X. I honestly think 10 is one of the greatest games ever made. So there's some pretty big shoes to fill. But it's a great game. Getting back to Final Fantasy X, though, like, the studio has the love for it. It's the same studio making 7 Remake. It's the same universe as FF7. And you have this desire for 10-3. So, again, if it's my own opinion, I don't think this game needs a remake of any kind. But the building blocks are there. And to pretend like they're not would simply be me not doing my job. So, look, again, it's not the one I would pick. Again, I'm still leaning on FF6. I think FF6 would be the most beneficial one to do this with, because I also think it would help revive that older era, that more fantasy era of Final Fantasy. How should 10 and 10-2 be remade? Each just one game, right? You don't need a trilogy for Final Fantasy X. Look, and again, I understand the desire to expand on these things more and, like, flesh them out the way you did Midgar. But you can do a shot for shot. You can do a shot for shot. I think there's appetites for both. There's appetites for the FF7 approach, which is a trilogy that's sort of existing as sort of like a definitive telling with its own changes. And I think there's also an appetite to remake something like FF10, where it's like, dude, just don't make Besaid 10 times as bigger. Keep Besaid the way it is, right? Those 2 simple rows of huts with the church, but just make it look beautiful, fresh coat of paint. I think there's an appetite for that. And I think if you were to do this with 10 and 10-2, that would be the approach you take. I think that I'd rather have 10-3 than a remake of them. Absolutely. Ryanitis, you don't got to tell me twice. I'll take a 10-3 over any Final Fantasy remake. Over any Final Fantasy remake, I'll take a 10-3. Let me be clear. Let me be clear. I may have to refill my water. I may. We'll see. We'll see if I can soldier on. Okay. Okay. Kevin says, if they do 10, I demand they do 10-2. I preferred 10-2 rather than the first game. You preferred 10-2? Can I ask you why that is? I'm curious. I would love to see the reaction on people if 10-3 gets made. I'll lose my shit, dude. I will absolutely lose my shit if there's a 10-3 announcement. I'll tell you that right now. Okay, let me check something. I got a little notification here. No, we're chilling. We're chilling. Okay. Let's move on here. Now that we brought up 10-10-2, which again, I brought up, wouldn't be the one I choose, but I think it's the one Square Enix might choose. It's got the popularity to hold it down. It's got unfinished business with 10-3, and they've been chirping about it. You know, and that's the other thing too. It's got such a strong gameplay system that if they built on Final Fantasy X system, bro, that's something that would excite me. That's something that would really excite me. Josh Z is in the house. Remember, for a year and a half, says 10 is ridiculously overrated. Get out of here. Get him out of here. Get him out. Ladies and gentlemen, get him out. Get him out. How dare you? Anyway, I'll finish your message. I played it once and have not touched it since. To me, it's just boring as hell. Sorry, but I can't help it. Josh Z, it's okay. Your opinions are always welcome here. Don't worry about it. Even though 10 is like my favorite Final Fantasy, Josh, your opinion is still welcome here. Look, I mean, I think that's the beautiful thing about Final Fantasy at the end of the day, is it's an anthology where there's a different game for everyone. There are different tastes for everyone. You know, FF10 may not be everyone's taste, but it's mine. I'll tell you that. It's mine. Oh boy, I still need to replay 10-2. It's a lot. So 10-3 should be turn-based? 100%. 100%. I'm telling you, man, turn-based is not a thing of the past, nor should it be. Metaphor Refantasio, which I've been playing, guys, let me tell you something. Metaphor Refantasio, brilliant. I'm only about 6 hours in, so I'm kind of singing its praises a little early. But I love it. What can I say? I love it. Okay, let's indulge my boy. I have a couple other Final Fantasies I wanted to bring up. I have a couple other ones I wanted to bring up before we kind of bounce off into conjecture. I love 10-2 because seeing Yuna get stronger and moving on from Tidus was bitter, but she was awesome for me and she was a badass. Also seeing her go from church girl to badass was cool. That's putting it in layman's terms, but it was cool to see what became of Yuna when she was severed off from her duty of being a summoner, right? Because that's what her life was all about, was being a summoner, being a summoner, being a summoner. But then when that identity is taken from her and the thing she was willing to fall back on, which was her love from Tidus, is also taken from her, albeit temporarily. But seeing her have to find herself and seeing that influenced by both Riku and Pain in sort of Yuna rediscovering who she is, it's a really cool thing to watch. I'm glad chat is based on 10-2. Well, she thought she was good. Exactly, Ryanitis. Exactly. Guys, you're making me so happy that I have such a based chat right now. I have such a based chat. Folsey's here. We just got even more based. The long and the short, none should get a remake. I will die on that hill. Folsey, listen, we've been exploring that idea, man. We've been exploring that idea. We've been exploring the idea that none should get a remake. I don't think it's the craziest position. I really don't think it's the craziest position. Remasters are another story, right? Preserving history so that these games can still be played on future consoles. That's one thing. Remakes are another. Give me a second, guys. I'm going to go refill my water. And yeah, we'll get to it. All right, we are back. I hope you guys don't mind. I love that be right back thing with Kobe because he's gotten so big since then. Like he was little back then. He was little. All right, let's size this down and back up. Okay. Yeah, I don't think we're doing articles anymore, so we can expand all the way. Just give me a second, guys. Little live production here, right? That's what you all come for. There we go. Okay. Blow that up a bit, and we're good. All right. The only one that deserves to be simplified, says Folsey, with a better system is 8. We were talking about that earlier. The 8, one of the things about 8 is the question becomes, what do you do with the combat? You know? I love seeing Kobe. He's a good boy. He's a good boy. He's the official mascot of the lodge. Official mascot of the lodge. But I do want to get another Be Right Back Up with him, but it's nice seeing him when he was so little, even though he's a big boy. Okay, so I don't know why, but I would love FF8 that goes full 80s. Yeah, I've seen the have you seen those like recreations, those like AI videos people have been making? Like what would a full-blown FF8 remake look like? So look, here's FF3, guys. Final Fantasy 3, which Yoshi P mentioned that this is the one he'd want to remaster, which I think is interesting. I love the idea. Not remaster, remake. I love the idea because it does bring the series back to its more fantasy roots, and there's a little bit more of a light-hearted tone here than what you're used to with modern Final Fantasy. You know, even though it does have its darker perspectives, but like if I told you this in FF16 were the same series, you wouldn't believe me. Which makes it all the more interesting it came from Yoshi P, right? That said, I think the desire to remake a game like Final Fantasy 3, I guess, is because it was so much smaller in scope that to blow it up into a modern AAA title wouldn't take as much, right? I think the reason why Yoshi P may be so drawn to potentially doing Final Fantasy 3 is because, simply put, it wouldn't be as big of an undertaking as, say, a Final Fantasy 8, a Final Fantasy 6, a 10. So, look, I've never played Final Fantasy 3, so I can't speak on it too much. But Yoshi P mentioning that this is the one he would want to do, that's too big a news to ignore and to not bring up in this episode. So, definitely felt like I got to bring that one up. All right, let's move on here. I got one more that I feel might get a remake. Might. And it doesn't come from nothing. It doesn't come from nothing. I'm going to pull up my receipts. I'm going to pull up the receipts, okay? I'm going to pull up the receipts. But maybe, let me pull up the receipts. Let me pull up the receipts. This doesn't come from nowhere. This doesn't come from nowhere. Let's pull up the receipts. Okay. Let's pull these up, all right? Let's pull these up. So Square Enix says, apparently our Moogle stance was a hot take, and we still stand by it. What is your hottest take or unpopular opinion on a Final Fantasy game? Alex Mukala, great account, great musician. You like music, you like Final Fantasy? He's a guy worth following. Says, before any other Final Fantasy title gets a remake, Final Fantasy 13 needs a remaster. Right? Base take, one that many of us would agree with. We would love to play the FF13 trilogy on PS5. Please do it. What's peculiar is the way Square Enix responded. Any reason for a remaster instead of a remake? And look, guys, 1,200 comments to reply to. 1,200 comments to reply to. They pick Alex. Now, it could be because Alex is an incredibly notable figure. A lot of people know him. A lot of people like him. By responding to this, it would get a lot of eyeballs. Here it is on this Schmucks podcast. You know, here we go. That said, it's very peculiar that they chose to respond to that. Don't even play like this. Xander, friend of the channel, gotta love him. But Shaw Brothers says, is Final Fantasy 15 knocked this game on PS4 yet? Yeah, Shaw Brothers. It's been on PS4. But, yeah, very interesting that Square would respond that way. Now, for all we know, it could just be an intern, so I don't want to put too much stock in it. But getting us back to FF13, a silly little intern over there. Okay, I'm going to pull something else up. That I definitely wanted to talk about today. If you recall the intro music to today's episode, that might have a bit of a hint for you as to what I'm about to pull up. Let's pull it over here. Boom. Okay, ladies and gents. Here's the thing that's kind of been a theme today when we're talking about all these prospects of a remake, prospects of a remaster. And, you know, obviously I have my criticisms about, you know, just because we're going to remake another Final Fantasy doesn't mean you have to do it like FF7. Remaking FF9 doesn't mean do a trilogy. Remaking FF6 doesn't mean do a trilogy. So on and so forth. What if you took Final Fantasy VI and you gave it the Octopath Traveler 2 treatment. Okay? What if you did an HD 2D for Final Fantasy 6, 5, 4, some of the more popular older ones on, say, the Super Nintendo? I think this would absolutely blow minds. I think it would absolutely blow minds. If they remade, say, Final Fantasy VI in this style, please. And you know what? You're starting to see it with Dragon Quest, right? If Dragon Quest does well, I bet you could see more of this. I bet you will see more of this. I would love to see 6 done like this. I would love to see 5 done like this. Lindsey Brown says, bro, if they remake 9, I want to parkour around as the den. I do too. I do too. Please. But this to me is like, again, we talk about remakes. It's like, why do we have to scale everything up to AAA, crazy, realistic looking graphics? Why has everything got to be scaled up to a 13? Right? Why not just scale up the pixel art instead? You don't have to go 3D with something that was once 2D. You just got to go HD with something that was once 2D. And take games like FF6 or FF5 or FF4 or FF3 and give them this treatment. In fact, you could probably do this with Final Fantasy 1 and people would go bonkers. You know what I mean? I want to see not just Square Enix, but the industry get back to a place where not everything needs to be super mega deluxe fun package, right? And we used to get this because handheld gaming was so good, right? Most of us grew up in a time where handheld gaming was so prevalent, whether it was your Game Boy, your PSP, your DS, your 3DS, your Vita. Like, mobile gaming was so big and so good that you had some of these smaller scaled projects these companies would release. For instance, there are people who Birth by Sleep is like their favorite Kingdom Hearts game. That was a PSP game made at a smaller scale because there was a market for that. But since handheld gaming in general has virtually disappeared and has been replaced with mobile phones, I feel like these smaller scale projects that these studios used to once pump out have sort of gone missing. And I think only now are you starting to see companies like Square Enix realize that there's still a market for this. And people will still, they don't only want AAA super deluxe fun package. Sometimes we're okay with something that's smaller scale. And if you do remake Final Fantasy VI, you don't have to do it like the FF7 trilogy. Just do it like this. Just do it like this. Stay hydrated. Again, thank you all for hanging out. We're about an hour deep. Please be sure to hit that like button. Let's do a poll. Let's do a poll over here on YouTube. I'm curious what the audience thinks. Which FF should be remade? Your options will be none, FF3, FF6. Let's do FF8. We're going to leave out FF9 because it's already, like, again, sort of soft confirmed. You know what I'm saying? I can only do 4 options? All right, then we're going to get rid of none and 3. FF6, FF8, FF10. And then I'm going to put in other. And if you believe other, just throw it into the chat. But I'm curious what the audience thinks. Throw out a poll for you guys. Okay. Okay. 2D HD all the way. But that's what I'm saying, man. And I'm going to say this a lot. This is a mantra for the channel now. And it's that, man, pixelated RPGs are not a thing of the past. They're a genre. This is a genre. This is not a thing of the past. This is a genre. And Octopath proves that It's not just for remakes. You can make new IPs like this too. So I hope Octopath still gets its day in the sun, man. I'll say that right now. Let's see how this poll is doing. FF6 is crushing it. In second place is FF8. Honestly, I expect that. Again, I didn't include FF9 because that's soft confirmed. I think the most likely ones are probably 6, 8, and 10. So I'm curious how that'll end up. But I'm telling you, man, there's a lot of directions they can take this. There's a lot of different directions they could take this. If they wanted to go full scale, blown up 3D, you should probably go FF10. But if you wanted to do 2D HD, FF6 is perfect, man. FF6 is perfect. And unfortunately, I feel like Final Fantasy VIII, once again, being the ugly stepsister of the PS1 era, and again, I say that endearingly, I love Final Fantasy VIII, but I feel like once again, it's unfortunately fallen into the middle, where it's not as old as FF6, therefore you can't do the pixel art, but it's not as beloved as FF10, so you can't sell it on popularity. Man, poor FF8. Always getting the short end of the stick. Yeah, FF6 is dominating this poll at 55% of the vote. FF8 is at 27, and the other two are at 9. I would like a remake of the OG Dissidias on the PSP. Dude, you know what I would give? Do you know what I would give for the frickin' like Dissidia to take off? For a Final Fantasy fighting game to break through? That's why I think they should do a Square Enix fighting game. I actually think that's their best option. Call me crazy. Call me crazy. But I guess maybe, and I'll take it here until I read some chats. I guess just to get back into the FF9 of it all. This is probably the most likely outcome. Again, it's definitely the elephant in the room when it comes to FF remakes. Even in interviews, it's coming up. People seem to have an idea that this is coming. And I guess whether any other one like we've discussed today is going to end up getting remade is ultimately going to depend on how well this FF9 project does, whatever it is. I love 8 so much, but 6, heck yeah. I'm telling you, they do 6 in 2D HD. It's a big win. Big win. But again, ultimately, I think FF9 is the one we could probably depend on. And if it does well, I don't think it stops there. I think if whatever this FF9 project is that's lurking in the shadows, I think if it does well, you're going to see a lot more. You're going to see a lot more. Clicked other on the poll by accident. Was going to go with 6 or 10. Well, probably for the best you didn't pick 6. Or else it'd be dominating the poll even more. The number one remake I want isn't even an FF game. I would jump for dear joy if they remake Parasite Eve. Ooh. Just got hit with a yawn. Parasite Eve would be a good remake. See, I fall into the pocket of people that never got to play Parasite Eve, but would be first in line to play a remake. I would be first in line to play a Parasite Eve remake. There's a lot that they could do at Square. Honestly. There's a lot that they could do. I saw somebody brought up Final Fantasy Tactics earlier. A Tactics remake would be cool. I would like to see them lean harder into the tactics, like a tactical RPG. Strategy RPGs are pretty sick. Excuse me. I think some water went down the wrong pipe or something. But I'm all good. I'm all good. All right. That puts us at 1 hour and 5 minutes. I think I've covered everything. Let me double check. FF Versus 13, though? Oh, yeah, you got to remake Versus 13. I mean, FF 15 is kind of a Versus 13 remake. Like, technically speaking, FF 15's kind of a Versus 13 remake. Excuse me. Yeah, I think I touched on every article. Touched on that particular thing. Let me check my bookmarks. Make sure I didn't leave anything out. Let's see here. Nope. Okay. Oh. Let me see here. Nope, that covers it. Okay. Honest opinion, I don't think FF15 really needs a remake. It doesn't. But I would love for a remaster for the 10th or 15th anniversary. A 10-year anniversary remaster would be cool. One that just sort of, like the Royal Edition, includes everything and maybe a few more quality of life updates. Vitrin says, oh my god, I would love Tactics. I never got to play it myself. I grew up watching my cousin. Yeah, I played Tactics back in the day. I never really gave it a fair shake. So I'd be interested in maybe giving it a shot again. Okay. 15 and Verimax is close as well. We'll get the Versus 13 remake. Listen, I'm in the boat of people. I would not mind. I would not mind if they redid Versus 13. That's one that would sell. That's one, frankly, that would make enough noise it would sell. But it ain't happening, man. It ain't happening. Later, David. Thanks for chilling, man. Appreciate you hanging out for the podcast. How about a full console definitive version of FF14? Well, it's funny. You know what? It's funny you say that. It's funny you say that. So, here, let's pull this up. Yoshi P discusses, and here, let's make this bigger. Oop, 1 second. Let's blow this up for you guys. Yoshi P does mention in this interview that they essentially want to make FF14 compatible as like a fully fledged like single player game. Like they want to make the game's campaign mode fully compatible with basically just playing by yourself, as opposed to linking up online and doing the dungeons and the raids with others. If they pull that off, they could one day do a console definitive version, which would be great. This is a game, arguably my favorite Final Fantasy. Arguably, again, it's either 14 or 10. I love them both for two very different reasons. They are two very different games. But yeah, I would be all for it. All for it. All hail Queen Y'shtola. Absolutely. Absolutely. I love Y'shtola. She had such a strong character arc in Realm Reborn Heavensward. You know, don't get me wrong, her character's had great moments and there's definitely been character growth and development, but she hasn't really had a second arc yet. They've set her up for one, right? She has she definitely has the foundation for a second arc ready to go, but she really hasn't had a full character arc since the front half of the FF14 story, which again is okay. It's one of the strongest character arcs in the game, and she serves her role in the later expansions, especially Shadowbringers and Endwalker. And though there aren't full-fledged character arcs there, there's still growth, there's still development, and I'm telling you, man, I'm gonna tell you this right now. Prediction. I think in this new saga we've just started with Dawn Trail, I think in one of the later expansions, Master Matoya, done. You want to know where to take Y'shtola's character next? Kill off her mentor. Kill off Y'shtola's mentor. That's the best thing you can do. I love Master Matoya. Don't get me wrong. But you really want Y'shtola to step into her own? You really want to give her some challenges to overcome? Bam. Attack the heart, Norman Osborn. Attack the heart. The thing I love most about FF14 is, to me, it feels like the closest to Shin Megami Tensei. Interesting. Is that due to the sort of the enemies and the lore behind the enemies? Because I haven't played Shin Megami Tensei, but I'm relatively familiar, just given my familiarity with the Persona series. But I'm curious what sort of overlap you see between the two. The poll's gotten a little bit closer. FF6 closing in at 46%, but FF8 at 31%. Other at 15%. And FF10 at 8%. See, that's what's crazy, man, is as beloved as FF10 is, there doesn't seem to be much sentiment among people to want a remake. And honestly, as I was kind of getting into when we were discussing it earlier, it's still a great game. It still holds up. Really doesn't need one. Really doesn't need one. All right. Now, with that said, yes, it's the whole fighting the gods. Yeah, that's kind of where I saw the same overlap as you. I was like, I think what he's picking up is sort of the lore with the enemies in the backdrop with that. But hell yeah. All right. With that said, I think we're going to wrap up today's episode there. It's been a real one. I did enjoy this. I've wanted to do this episode for a while because, again, I love the Final Fantasy series. Be interesting to see what they do with remakes from here on out. We'll have our eye on Final Fantasy IX, see if that pops up at any minute. Could pop up any day now. But I'm glad we got to do this episode. Wanted to do it for a little while now. Coming away, I still think FF6 is probably the strongest candidate. I think an HD 2D remake of FF6 would be the best thing you could do after the FF9 remake drops. Because then you might be looking at 3 different remakes with 3 different approaches, which I think could be cool, right? If no 2 remakes are the same, right? If FF7 gets like this trilogy treatment, FF9 just gets sort of like an expansive treatment, and then FF6 gets like the HD 2D treatment, you could actually create a scenario where, again, no 2 remakes are alike. You know? All these conversations about remakes emphasize how much the FF series is revered. It's nice. It is, and it deserves to be revered. It's a cornerstone of video game history and probably of entertainment history too. I'm glad the series is still going strong. I do wish it had better sales numbers. I do. I wish it was reaching a wider audience. I think they need to space out their releases in order to do that. I think they need to go back to turn-based combat in order to do that. And I think they may want to change their marketing approach, which is a broad statement, but I stand by it. Thanks for the entertainment before my lunch. Hey, that's what I'm here to do. That's what I'm here to do. Entertain. Also, appreciate the stream as always, Landy. When life gets hectic, it's nice to have a place to talk about this stuff. Hey, you and me both, man. You and me both. This is the lodge is a very relaxing place for me. And I have you sickos and normies in the chat to thank for that. Again, episodes like this where I can just click live and be like, all right, I'm going to talk with the homies about Final Fantasy a little bit. You know, I've got a lot of stuff working behind the scenes that I'm really excited to share. I don't want to say soon. I don't want to say soon because I can't control how fast some things come together. But I have some long form videos I've been scripting. I'm excited to get out. But anyway, I'm going to stop yapping about that stuff. We'll probably be live with more Metaphor at some point. Can't say when. We got a Nuzlocke to finish up, and we got Xenoblade to get back to. So the channel has a lot on its plate. That said, we're going to wrap it up here, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for hanging out. Really appreciate it. Love chilling and chatting. We'll see you all soon. Got some stuff in the works. Hope to release some stuff soon. And we got a Landy Lodge 6-year anniversary stream coming up. So be on the lookout for that. One of these weekends, we have a 6-year anniversary stream coming up. So be on the lookout for that. A glorious 6 years it has been. For those of you who have maybe either just gotten here or have been here for quite a while, you are appreciated all the same. But anyway, that's going to just about do it. We're going to wrap it up there. You, ladies and gentlemen, you all be good out there. Be good to yourselves. Be good to each other. And I will see all of you beautiful sickos and normies next time.